Hello, it's a Monday morning and I'm looking at this album here, which I purchased new on Friday, so what, 3 days ago. If you don't know what this is, because it doesn't actually say anywhere on the front, does it? This is the new Opeth album, The Last Will and Testament. It was released on the 22nd of November worldwide after having been delayed for a month and a half. I don't know why it was delayed, but it was. And it was their first album since In Cauda Venenum, which was 2019, I believe, or 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And so it's kind of, I guess, highly anticipated amongst the people who like this kind of music. I got it. So, like I said, I got it on Friday. That was the day it was released. So that's kind of the first time I've done that in a long time. Actually, I've ordered things online and they were delivered upon release, but to actually go to a shop and physically buy an album on the day it was released, I haven't done that. I can't remember the last time I've done it. Well over 15 years. Probably longer. But I decided to do that because I wanted to listen to this album. I am a fan of Opeth. At one stage, they were probably my top 3 bands. And they're still one of my favorite bands, probably not my top 3 anymore. But I still like them a lot. I think they've got a great discography with some absolutely phenomenal albums. So I went to the local JB Hi-Fi, which I've talked about before. It's an electronics chain. It's an Australian chain, and they sell, TVs and laptops and tablets and phones, but they also have a section for DVDs and Blu-rays and CDs, and an ever-increasing section for records. And so I went there after I finished work, quite excited, because like I said, I haven't done that, going on day of, and I'd actually been avoiding, because they had released 2, I guess, singles, if you want to call it that, 2 tasters. Opeth released 2 songs in the months leading up to this. And I listened to the very first one, and I quite liked it. And then after that, I thought to myself, okay, I'm not going to listen to anything else. And so I purposely avoided any of the leaks or any of the discussion or even the second single, because I wanted to listen to this fresh. So I went into the shop and I went to the CD section, which is relatively small, but they got some stuff there, Into the O section, nothing there, no Opeth. I'm going, okay, what's going on? Go to the new release section, which is just a kind of a small, very narrow shelf. Nothing there. Went to the kind of the chart, because they have the most, 1 to 20 most popular albums for the week. Nothing there, and I'm like, God damn it. So I went onto my phone and looked on their website, and you can check, where which actual stores it's in stock. I checked the store I was in, and it says, yes, it's in stock in this store. And so I don't like asking shop assistants things. My wife loves to do that. My wife, if we walk into a shop, she'll ask the shop assistant before she's even looked for the thing herself, which drives me crazy. But sometimes you have to. So I went and found someone. It was actually if someone was walking past me, I would have asked them sooner, but there was no one. So I kind of stood looking awkward, looking around. Everyone seemed busy. So I walked over and found this guy who didn't seem to be doing anything. He was in another section though. He was over by the video games. I said, I know it's not your section, but could you tell me, where is this album? It says it's in your store. And he said, I think this is out the back. And so he wandered out the back and came back about 2 minutes later and said, here you go, Last Will and Testament. I thanked him profusely. So I'm not sure why it wasn't on the shelves. Maybe they'd just received it and they hadn't put it out onto the shelves because that was the release day. But that kind of annoyed me. Not in a strong way, but I mean as in if there are other people who are looking for it, shouldn't you put that out? How's it going to sell if you don't put it out? How can they say CDs aren't selling anymore if you don't put the bloody thing on the shelf? Anyway, I took it and bought it, and then I as I mentioned in my previous video, I now have a CD player in my own car. not just the family car, but my own car. And so I was able to listen to it immediately. So just to give a little bit of background before I kind of talk about my own personal feelings on this CD. Opeth are it's hard to define them now. Let's just say a progressive metal band that started more purely as a death metal band with progressive elements and moved through the years to incorporate more and more progressive elements, folk elements, away from the death metal. And so, they formed in about 1990, and they went the first few years kind of just without doing much. They released their first album, I think 94, 95, Orchid and Morning Rise, which came out 96, 97. They are kind of seen as their death metal albums. And a lot of people love those. A lot of people especially love Morning Rise and see that as kind of, I think Michael called it the magnum opus of the band, if you like that style. But for me, those first two albums aren't, there are certainly parts on them that I like, but they're probably my least listened to of their albums. And they move into their next phase, at least how I consider it, the next phase of My Arms, Your Hearse, Still Life, and Blackwater Park. And those three albums for me are my favorite work of theirs. And that's hard to say because I actually like a lot of the stuff that came after, but yeah, I guess it kind of got two peaks almost. But anyway, those three albums, they're moving more in a progressive direction, incorporating more clean vocals, not just growled death metal screams. They were also getting more conceptual. My Arms, Your Hearse and Still Life were both concept albums. Very basic concepts, but still concepts, and I think quite interesting concepts. Blackwater Park is my favorite album of theirs. That came out in about 2001. That was the first thing I ever heard of theirs. The first song I ever heard of theirs was Blackwater Park from the album Blackwater Park, which is like a 10-minute journey. Then they move on and they come, I kind of consider the next part of kind of an intermediate period or a transition period where they release Damnation and Deliverance. Deliverance and Damnation, I can't remember which one came first. Deliverance is kind of just almost like a step back into more pure metal, and Damnation is at the time, an anomaly. It was a completely clean vocal, no metal whatsoever, almost like an acoustic album. It wasn't acoustic because it had non-acoustic instruments, but a lot of acoustic, a lot of keyboards, mellotron, produced by Stephen Wilson, although Stephen Wilson from Porcupine Tree had produced also Blackwater Park and parts of Deliverance. But Damnation was kind of seen as, could be kind of seen as a bit of a turning point in their career. Then they went on and released Ghost Reveries. Ghost Reveries and Watershed, I kind of see those albums as twins. They kind of connect together a lot sonically and songwriting wise for me. I love those two albums as well. That's like I was saying, I've kind of a double peak. I kind of see the the Still Life era and then the Ghost Reveries era as a kind of two peaks for me of their career, their music they've written. Ghost Reveries especially, because that was kind of when I was at the highest peak of my fandom for them. Around 2004, 5, 6, they were my favorite band. And I was kind of obsessed with them. And that was also the time I saw them live. I saw them in 2006. I came to New Zealand, played a concert at the St. James Theatre. I met them afterwards, had a little chat with Michael, a very short chat with Michael and Peter, the former guitarist. Peter in particular, I found a really nice guy. Very genuine and friendly, and I don't know how it seemed like a very sincerely nice person. Then after that, my fandom around Watershed was a great album, but it kind of started waning. As in, I was starting to listen to a lot more stuff around that period, around 2008, 2009-ish. My musical world was opening up a lot. And so I was kind of leaving metal behind because I had a real metal phase in the early part of the 2000s. And I was getting a lot more electronic music and stuff like that, so I wasn't following them as closely. However, we get to 2011 and they released the Heritage album. And this was, I guess, the biggest turning point in their career. They'd had several turning points, but Heritage is where they completely did away with the death metal growls, screams, however you want to call it, and went purely into clean vocals and almost became another band. Some people refer to this period as New Peth. There's the old Peth and the new Peth of Opeth. And for me, I don't know that much about describing different musical genres, especially prog, but to me it almost sounded like they became like a 70s prog band. Like a lot of kind of Jethro Tull, King Crimson type sounding stuff. Yes, those kinds of bands. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, because I actually really like the Heritage album. And even when it came out, I liked it. I wasn't a big like fucking metal, got to be screaming and got to be fucking chugging guitars. I was never like that with metal, even at the peak of my metal years. I like the dynamics of that was why I liked Opeth in the beginning, because it had a mixture of the light and the dark. And certainly with Heritage, it was still dark, but moving away from that death metal aspect completely. And so, some fans were turned off by that, but they also gained some new fans. But I was not really as closely intertwined with following what people were saying about the band and the music. I was just kind of listening to the music when it was released and then moving on. The album after that was Pale Communion. That is the only Opeth album I don't own a physical copy of. I listened to it when it came out, but I don't own a physical copy. Then came Sorceress. Sorceress is a good album, but maybe I'd consider it perhaps their weakest album. I own it, but I haven't listened to it a huge amount. I've listened to it, like, when I say a huge amount, like a lot of the other albums I've listened to so many times that it's kind of like almost part of my DNA, and I know every drum beat and hi-hat hit. And whereas Sorceress, maybe I've listened to it a little bit less than that, and so it never really captured me as much. Then was Encalled of Venom, which was 2019, and the interesting aspect about that is that they released it in Swedish, because obviously they are a Swedish band, their native tongue, and so they released the version in Swedish, the original version, but they also released it in English. I much prefer the Swedish version. It sounds a lot more natural. Maybe it's just because I'm used to it, and when I hear the English version, it sounds kind of a bit awkward after being used to the Swedish version. In all that time, I just went over from, let's say, 94, their first lineup. There were actually lineups before that, but anyway, from the first recorded lineup through to Encalled of Venom, they'd been through a lot of lineup changes, and the only constant was Mikael Åkerfeldt, the singer and songwriter and guitarist, or one of the guitarists. And basically, it's his band. He is not just the main songwriter, I'd say probably the only songwriter. The contributions from the other members are pretty limited, and that may have contributed to some of the lineup turnover over the years. They've, I guess they haven't had that. For a lot of metal bands go through fucking guitarists like nothing. They've had two guitarists. They had Peter Lindgren up until Ghost Reveries, and then Fredrik Åkesson, I think is his name. Since then, he was formerly in Arch Enemy, the Swedish kind of metal, death metal band. So he's the second guitarist. And then drummers, they've had Anders Nordin, Martin Lopez, who a lot of fans kind of consider the best drummer they had. Martin Axelrod, who left during the COVID era because he didn't want to get the COVID vaccination. Because obviously when they were touring after, when COVID died down, a lot of touring bands, you needed the COVID vaccine passport for travel and for entry into certain venues. And being in a band going around the world obviously would have made it a bit difficult if you didn't have that. And so he left. I'm not sure how acrimonious that leaving was, because I read something recently, which I didn't know, that like Michael tried to go to his house and like kind of talk to him. He like refused to come out and talk to him. Like he'd knock on the door and the girlfriend would come and go, "Oh no, Martin's not here." And Michael could see that Martin was like sitting in the living room. I don't know if it was exactly like that, but that's how I imagine it at least. And now they've got a young guy, what's his name? Valtteri, I think is his name. I don't know much about him, but he is the most recent drummer. And then bassists, I guess they've only had two bassists, Johan something in the early albums. Now they've got Martin Mendez, they've had three Martins. Martin Mendez, he's in the bass role, and he's been in it since '97. So I guess he's a pretty much a constant along with Mikael now. And then keyboardist. Well, they didn't have a keyboardist for the first 4 or 5 albums, did they? But when they got to Damnation, they had a lot of keyboards, so they incorporated a keyboardist into the lineup, which is Pierre Wiberg. And he left. And apparently I was reading stuff about that recently, and that sounded a little bit acrimonious as well. Like he wanted more input and... Anyway. Now their keyboardist is Joachim, something like that. And you can see the lineup as it is now. Mikael, Valtteri, the drummer, Martin Mendez, the bassist, Frederick, the guitarist, and Joachim, the keyboardist. So they've been through a lot of twists and turns through their career, as in their sound has really continued to evolve and change almost every album. I guess you could say in that kind of 2010s prog kind of, Heritage, Sorceress, and Incaudivinum, which are kind of the three kind of proggy albums, 70s style prog albums. Maybe they didn't evolve as much, perhaps. But with this album, it's kind of another step or a twist or turn again. In that they are bringing back the screamed death metal vocals in this album and going back to a little bit more of a metal influence to a degree. So I've listened to this album a few times through now. I'd say it's a pretty dense album. You can see here the CD art design is the same they've had on the last 3 releases, because this label, which is Moderbloget or something like that, I think is an imprint on Nuclear Blast for Opeths releases. So it's kind of like Opeths, there it's the name there. Moderbolagat. It's kind of like Opeth's own album. I'm not sure what RPM is. Anyway, bloody record labels, it's so hard keeping track of what they're doing, incorporating and buying each other out. And so each of the last 3 CD releases have had the same mushroom design on it. So yes, I said it's quite a dense album. It's quite being having not fully absorbed it. It's quite unfocused, in my opinion, and that's not necessarily in a bad way. And that might just be because it is so dense. It's hard to bring it into focus. with just a few listens. A lot of prog albums are like that. Prog metal albums, you have to listen to it a number of times before you can get it. And I saw like someone recently, Devin Townsend, this is not really comparable because his album was almost the opposite. Devin Townsend released an album a few weeks ago now, wasn't it? Called Power Nerd. And I'm a big Devin Townsend fan. And Devin Townsend had a similar kind of evolution as Opeth, that he kind of started out purely metal, not really death metal, but purely metal. And over the years, he's gone so many different ways. You know, with Strapping Young Lad, it was real kind of brutal metal. And then he's done albums like Ghost, which are like Damnation, like very soft and acoustic and almost new agey, and then all over the place. And I love a lot of his stuff. But his most recent thing, Power Nerd, I listened to it and I just thought it was not good. I just didn't really enjoy it, other than like kind of one or two songs. And people will say, well, you got to listen to it, you got to listen to it. And it's like, well, how much can you say that? If something requires endless listening, does that mean it's good? It's almost like you're trying to brainwash yourself into liking it or something. At the same time, I do understand, because there are albums where it took me years to get. And then after I got them, I loved them. Going back to Devin Townsend again, the album Key, which was the first album he released as the Devin Townsend Project in about 2008, 2009. The first time I heard that out of order, because I heard Addicted before that. And Addicted is like such an instantaneous pop metal, fucking like radio friendly record that's so catchy and like a sugar rush, that when you hear Key after that, you're like, Key's like almost the opposite. Key's like a real slow burner. And so when I first heard Key, I was like, I didn't like it. And over time, I kind of came around song by song. I was like, actually, that's quite a good song. I like that part of the song. And then it took, like, I'd say a good 5 years for me to fully appreciate that album, to the point where now it's one of my favorite albums of his. Is that going to happen the same way with this? I don't know. The way that the song, this is another concept album. Like, they've done a few before. So the songs don't have names. It's got 8 or 9. What might say in here? 7. See, it says this. It's got this little symbol, like this little S, like a double S, S1, S2. These are the tracks. The track 1 is called, that symbol means paragraph. Paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3. So each song is called a paragraph. And then the last song is what, the greatest story never told, or something like that, or the story never told. So it doesn't actually say anywhere on here the names of the bloody songs, which is anyway. So the fact that the songs don't have names, coupled with the music and the concept nature of it, kind of runs together. It all kind of mixes and meshes together, and so it's hard to kind of differentiate a lot of it. As you listen to it, you hear little bits and pieces. You're like, oh, that sounds interesting, or that's weird, or like some kind of keyboard line. There's this one part that sounds like the Unsolved Mysteries theme tune from that, the Unsolved Mysteries show in the 80s and the 90s. And there's a lot of flute. Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. Speaking of Jethro Tull, Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull features in this. I don't know if he's the one playing the flute. It must be him playing the flute. But I know he does the narration. When you hear a voice speaking, that's Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. There's a part in the first song. The first song was the first single. I instantly like that. It's got a real kind of evil feel to that. Michael is singing draped in death, the howl of law, and Ian Anderson speaks it. So he goes, draped in death. Oh, I'm not going to do it. But anyway, when you hear someone speaking in that song, that's Ian Anderson from Death Row Tull. So the story of the concept runs throughout all the songs, obviously. And if you want to look at this is the last will and testament of the person, the character in the story. I'm not really that interested in the concept. However, yeah, it's there. You can see, like I said, Ian Anderson, flute, spoken word. Joey Tempest, he does some backing vocals as well. Mia Westlund that plays the harp, I don't know who she is. Miriam Ockerfeldt, that's his daughter, Michael's daughter. Travis Smith did the artwork. Travis Smith does a lot of artwork for Opeth and a lot of those bands like Catatonia, he's done some for them. And again, Devin Townsend, he's done some for him. So I talked a lot there about their history and stuff, but I didn't really say much about the music because, like I said, after listening to it over the last 3 days, I haven't really broken through into it. It's hard to even kind of differentiate the songs. Is that because it's like so super proggy that it's so dense that it takes that? I don't know. This is not the case with their previous releases. If I listen through to their previous, like Ghost Reveries, for example, the first listen through, you can differentiate and pick out all the different parts of the song. It can take you multiple listens to kind of appreciate the songs, but you can get the songs pretty quickly. Same with their more recent stuff, but not the case. Other than the first song, Paragraph 1, I don't know what it is. There's been overwhelming positive reviews of this album from critics and fans alike. However, there are some things I've been reading online, and there are some people who have a similar kind of opinion as me. They're saying that it seems unfocused. Doesn't mean I haven't enjoyed it. Doesn't mean I've listened to it and thought, I don't like this. That's not the case. It's more that I've listened to it and thought, I need to listen to this again. And then I listen to it again and I get to the end and I think, I need to listen to this again. I still haven't captured or grasped this. Yeah. There's not really much else I can say about it because I don't feel qualified to speak on it yet. The last song, the great. Hang on, let me look at the name because I'm going to say it slightly wrong and it's going to annoy me. Something like The Greatest Story Never Told. I'm trying to look at something and you push it and it slowly bloody. It is called A Story Never Told. Okay, that's more of a straightforward kind of like, if you know Burden from what album was Burden on? Watershed. That kind of almost like a ballady metal, straightforward type song. But the rest of it, yeah, dense. That's the word I keep coming back to. It feels very dense, sonically and conceptually and orally and in every way, instrumentally. It sounds like there's a lot going on, but almost to the degree that it's a bit muddy. And I don't mean muddy production. Maybe then this certainly could just be on my side. Like I said, it seems to have received overwhelming positive critical praise. And if you read like their Reddit subreddit right now, the Opeth subreddit, it's again over people like going, it's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. I cried when listening to it. And that might just be the hype of something just being released. That does happen. I remember when Saint Anger came out. Nowadays, everyone knows Saint Anger is a turd. And even with 20 years hindsight, it's still sounds pretty terrible. Not just the production and the tin can drums and all that kind of stuff, but just the songs. But I remember when it first came out, like the first day or two, maybe not as much as that, there were people going, oh, this is amazing, this is like revolutionary, this is, and going like saying things. And I remember even when it first came out, I was like, nah, this sounds terrible. This sounds bad. But people, there is, this kind of this hype when things are first released. So I don't know if I'm not saying that this is the case with that, but it might be a little bit. And connect to this, I actually just bought a ticket to their concert. They are coming to New Zealand, not for a long time though. And this is quite unusual. The tickets went on sale, was it early last week or the week before last? And they're not playing until November next year, November 2025. Usually when a band comes, they release tickets, like 6 months in advance? Unless it's a really big band, like Coldplay. They came here recently and they played 3 nights at a big stadium. And I think they sold tickets, a year in advance. But Opeth are not that big, and but they are selling tickets 1 year in advance. So I got a ticket. It wasn't cheap, to be honest. It was a lot more expensive than I thought it would have been. But I bought it regardless. It's a seated concert, which probably gives you a clue to what kind of, what they're going to be presenting. Because I saw them in 2006 and it absolutely wasn't seated. It was a typical metal type concert with people smashed in together and, doing what you usually do at a metal concert. But this is completely seated on the GA, floor, as well as obviously the balcony and stuff. So I'm not sure what they've got planned exactly. Like this album, it's not like the previous albums, like Heritage or Sorceress or Calvinium. I could see a seated kind of concert for that, especially Heritage. But this album is, like I said, they're kind of stepping back into the metal a little bit more. And you'd think that they wouldn't have seated, but I don't know, but maybe there's like a economics reason. Maybe they get more money if they have seated everything, or who knows. But yeah, that was a lot of kind of blather, wasn't it? But, this band is kind of really big. They were really big in my life. And so even though I'm not as big a fan as I used to be, whenever they release an album, it still kind of seems like a big deal. And whenever they tour, even though they don't tour very often, it still seems like a big deal as well, even though I don't listen to them anywhere as much as I used to. However, when I do listen to them, I always remember why I like them. They have some really amazing songs. Yeah. Anyway, we'll leave it there because that's half an hour. And I doubt anyone's going to watch a whole half hour of someone just jabbering on. Thank you for watching.